This evening, we are continuing in our study concerning the work and ministry of angels. And tonight, we want to talk about the work of angels in serving God's people. And we're going to discuss a little bit, kind of an overview of this. And Lord willing, we'll talk a little bit more about it next Wednesday. But one of the things that we understand about angels is they are those that are doing God's bidding in this world. And that's a key factor to understand, is that they are doing the bidding of God, but they're not doing the bidding of themselves. The good angels do as God commands them, nothing more and nothing less. They're not given orders to come to this world to deal with whatever situation it may be and decide, well, if I was doing it, I might do it different. Now, there were those angels that did that, and we'll talk about them as we go along in our study. That's talking about Satan and the angels that followed him. Angels come to this world to serve God's people. In the book of Hebrews, in chapter 1, and I believe that is 14, sometimes that night crew messes up on my overheads, and I'm going to have a little visit with them because I am the night crew. That is verse 14, not 4. So you'll have to write that in. In Hebrews chapter 1, in verse 14, it says, "They are not all ministering spirits sent out to render service for the sake of those who will inherit eternal salvation." Now, the Hebrew writer is giving us a contrast here in Hebrews chapter 1. And it's a contrast between Jesus and the angels. And in essence, he's bringing to light that Jesus is far more better than the angels, because Jesus is the Son. And that's the context of what he's talking about here. But he gets down here to verse 14, and he says that the spirits, the angels, they have a special job. And they got to fulfill that job. And it's a job, for a better word, it's a job given to them by God for them to fulfill. And it's quite simply that they will render service for the sake of those who will inherit eternal salvation. And that's a key. These angels that God utilizes gives him the glory, and in turn, they assist whenever there is a need. Now, it notes here, in verse 14, that he makes that transition from talking about Jesus, and he uses a rhetorical question. He says, "Are they not?" Well, it means that they are. They are ministering spirits. Now, we're going to talk about the theology or the idea of guardian angels. Now, I know everybody had that on their mind already. But I want us to go through and look at that in one lesson in and of itself. What we know is that there are angels who were created before man, before humanity, and that those angels are currently working in this world. Now, there's a lot of talk, for better, concerning how do angels work in our world today. And in essence, they work as God tells them to. It's that simple. Now, the thing about it is we don't want to add to or take away from or what I think or you think or whatever. We want to stick with God's Word. But He's not specifically, doesn't specifically say how they work. But we know that if God commands an angel to do something, that is what He does. And from most of our study of God's Word, it becomes evident that in our world today, that the angels work providentially. Now, we talked a little bit about this before. And I want us to again remind others and somebody that might jump upon just this lesson on our videos. Miraculous manifestations are supernatural. They are instantaneous. They do a certain thing, and then it's done. That's miraculous. Now, the question that pops into our minds, could God send an angel to do something miraculous? If it be God's will, I suspect He could. No, I know He could. But what we see is more of God's effect to us today is in that realm that brings to light the idea that He works through nature. And that's what we're talking about here. He works through nature. Now, is that giving us enough sense to know better than to do something and keep us out of trouble? Could be. Would it be something that like unto something happening in our lives and we kind of getting a nudge or a move or whatever? Could be. In reality, nobody really knows exactly when an angel's doing his assistance. But I truly believe that there are times that God uses the providential nature to move us along, to put us someplace. Now, we think about the storms the other night and how terrible they are. Now, we're going to have storms. That's just the reality of it. But if my house is in the direct path of a tornado, and I look out the window and there it is, and it comes up to my house and it jumps over my house, could I call that a miracle? No, because I've seen it happen too many times before. It's nature. But if automatically I was moved out from in front of it, just instantaneously, poof, poof, and it tore down my house, would that be a miracle? Could be. But what we do know is this, is that the angels and God today work in that providential manner. And that's a key thing to know in their ministry. Now I want you to look over here at Hebrews chapter 1 verse 14. They are to render service for those who inherit salvation. So God's children are those that are blessed by what is done by these angels. So we'll talk a little bit about the idea of the guardian angel, but I don't want to get into that this evening. I just want us to understand that the angels aren't in heaven just sitting there looking down and saying, look at those guys and what they're doing. They're not doing that. They're ministering. They're working. They have a purpose. And the purpose is to help us when we need that assistance. And God sends them to do so. The psalmist notes in Psalm 91, beginning in verse 9, got that one right. It says, for you have made the Lord my refuge, even the Most High your dwelling places. No evil will befall you, nor will any plague come near your tent. For he will give his angels charge concerning you, to guard you in all your ways. They will bear you up in their hands, that you do not strike your foot against a stone. You will tread upon the lion and cobra, the young lion and the serpent you will trample down. Well, we see here that God is going to take care of those that are his. He notes here, he says in verse 11, for he will give his angels charge concerning you to guard you in all your ways. Now that does not denote, now I want you to think about this. That does not denote that the angel is going to force you to do anything. You know, it's kind of like that fellow that asks what's in that 5-gallon bucket over there, and somebody says there's a rattlesnake in there. Well, he says, oh, well, you know, God's going to guard my ways, so I'm going to go over and stick my hand in that bucket. Well, guess what's going to happen? He's going to get bit. God gave him enough sense not to stick his hand in that bucket. Now, that's just, hopefully we're all smarter than that. Some folks aren't, I'm afraid. That's crazy. I always enjoy going down to the roundup every year when I get an opportunity. So the work of angels is serving God's people as they serve God's people. They have helped to provide the physical needs of the believer. In Genesis chapter 21 and verse 15, let's start back at verse 14. It says, so Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder, and gave her the boy and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was used up, she left the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him, about a bow shot, for she said, do not let me see the boy die. And she sat opposite him and lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the lad crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter with you, Hagar? Do not fear, for God has heard the voice of the lad. Where is he? Arise, lift up the lad and hold him in the hand, for I will make a great nation of him. And God opened the eyes, and she saw the well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave it the lad a drink. God was with the lad as he grew and lived in the wilderness and became an archer. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Desperate situation. Hagar had been sent out away because of the situation that was going on there in Genesis 21. You can go back and read that. But it was desperate. It was a desperate thing. God heard the lad, and he sent the angel. and helped them with the situation that they were in. And there are times that, honestly, God helps us like that, providentially. I've known of times in my life and that things have happened that couldn't have been anything more than the providential working of God. You know, it just, things fall into place like they're supposed to, and if we accept it, then truly we are blessed. In 1 Kings 19, beginning here in verse 1, it says, Now Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, So may the gods do to me, and even more, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. Jezebel wasn't happy about what Elijah had done, so she was going to kill him. That's what it boils down to. Verse 3. And he was afraid and arose and ran for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belonged to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went on a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a juniper tree. And he requested for himself that he might die, and said, It is enough now, O Lord, take my life, for I am not better than my fathers. Well, he was afraid, again, going back to verse 3, that Jezebel's army, in essence, was going to hunt him down, and they were going to kill him. So he takes off. He's hiding here under this juniper tree. In verse 5 of 1 Kings chapter 19, it says, He lay down and slept under a juniper tree, and behold, there was an angel touching him. And he said to him, Arise, eat. Then he looked, and behold, there at his head a bread cake baked on hot stones, and a jar of water. So he ate and drank, and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came again a second time, and touched him, and said, Arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you. So he arose and ate and drank, and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights in Horeb, the mountain of God. Well, he was hiding out, in essence, from Jezebel. God took care of him. And God takes care of those who are his. I remember an instance where one of our girls got hurt. And we didn't have the finances we had no insurance, let's put it that way. So we were taking care of her situation as best we could at home. Well, she really needed to go see a doctor. And you know, it was kind of unique that unbeknownst to us, that opportunity popped up and she was able to go see the doctor. And we hadn't told anybody else really about the situation. And she's fine today. And we were doing what was right for her. But God takes care of those who are his. We didn't have the finances to have insurance. We didn't have the finances to go to the doctor. And God provided. There's been a lot of times that we couldn't have went out and bought a load of groceries. But God's always provided for our family. God provides for those who are his. In Genesis 19, we talk again about Lot and his family, and how the angels came to Sodom and Gomorrah, and all the things that went on there. And they warned Lot to get out of Sodom and Gomorrah, because destruction was coming upon those cities because of the sin that was in those cities. In verse 19, or chapter 19, verse 15, It says, when morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, Up, take your wife and 2 daughters who are here, for you will be swept away in the punishment of this city. Now remember, some of Lot's family, they rejected the opportunity to leave. They stayed. But the angels tells Lot, his wife and his 2 daughters, get up, get out, punishment's coming. Verse 16. But he hesitated. So the men seized his hand and the hand of his wife and the hand of his 2 daughters, for the compassion of the Lord was upon him, and they brought him out and put him outside the city. They took his hand and they pulled him outside the city, because that was the will of God. Now, when we look at that, we see a providential working of God. The angels led them out of the city. I mean, took his hand and drug him out. Now, God could have done it miraculously. He could have left Lot and his wife and daughters in Sodom and Gomorrah and destroyed everything around him. But he didn't do that. He took him out of the city, got him out of the place of the disaster that was about to come. Now let's look in the New Testament. Let's look at Acts chapter 12. We're going to start back up about verse 5. Now this is the angel that delivered Peter from prison. They had been thrown into prison for preaching the gospel. And they were in shackles. They were in a unique situation. Acts chapter 12, beginning in verse 5. It says, So Peter was kept in prison, but prayer for him has been made fervently by the church of God. On the very night when Herod was about to bring him forward, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and guards in front of the door were watching over the prison. They must have thought he was a dangerous man. And to them, might have been in their own minds. Well, not only was Peter praying, I would suspect, but the church of God, the congregation there, was praying for him also. He was sleeping there between these 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, not just one. There was a guard in front of the door. They were watching. They didn't want him getting out. Verse 7, Acts chapter 12. And behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell. And he struck Peter's side and woke him up, saying, Get up quickly. And his chains fell off his hands. Kind of be a rude awakening there, but it's time to go. Not going to mess around any. Verse 8. And the angel said to him, Gird yourself and put on your sandals. And he did so. And he said to him, Wrap your cloak around you and follow me. And he went out and continued to follow. And he did not know that what was being done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. So something that was very unique, but it was going on and it was happening. But he may have been kind of like I get up in the mornings a little groggy before you get your coffee. Well, he thought it was a vision. Verse 10. When they had passed the first and second guard, they came to the iron gate that led into the city, which opened for them by itself. They went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. The angel fulfilled his obligation, fulfilled what he was supposed to do. He was gone. Then Peter came to himself. He said, Now I know for sure that the Lord has sent forth his angel and rescued me from the hands of Herod, and from all that the Jewish people were expecting. And of course, we recall that he went back and to where the brethren were at that time. Of course, we think about the passage in Acts chapter 8. And that was when the angel directed Philip to go speak to the Ethiopian. It says, "But an angel of the Lord spoke to Philip, saying, Get up and go south to the road that descends from Jerusalem to Gaza." And he was to take the message of the gospel to the Ethiopian. The angel comes along and says, "Look, you got something to do. Here's what you need to do." In Acts 27, we see the Apostle Paul being encouraged by an angel in his shipwreck. In Acts 27, in verse 21, it says, "When they had gone a long time without food, then Paul stood up in their midst and said, Men, you ought to have followed my advice and not have set sail from Crete, and incurred this damage and loss. Yet, now I urge you to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night an angel of God, to whom I belong, and whom I serve, stood before me and saying, Do not be afraid, Paul, you must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who are sailing with you." Paul gets encouragement from the angel and gives encouragement for those that are struggling through this shipwreck situation. God is there for his people. And then, of course, we think about Luke chapter 16 and verse 19. Talking about the angel who took the soul of Lazarus into Abraham's bosom. Luke 16, beginning verse 19, says, "Now there was a rich man, and he habitually dressed in purple and fine linen, joyously living in splendor every day. And a poor man named Lazarus was laid at his gate, covered with sores, and longed to be fed with the crumbs which were fallen from the rich man's table. Besides, even the dogs were coming and licking his sores. Now the poor man died and was carried away by the angels into Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried." Many think that whenever we make that transition between this life and the next, we'll be carried away by angels into Abraham's bosom. You know, that gives me a little comfort. Think about that. And whenever I leave this world, that the angels, the good angels, will carry me away for an eternity. When we think about angels, we see them mentioned a great deal in both the Old and the New Testament. And we need to understand the application of their work and what they do. And as far as the account of Scripture is concerned, their intervention in the affairs of humanity, they occur occasionally, possibly the exception of the rule. And in our world today, it is evident that they work providentially through God's will. The key is they do God's will, not their own. They don't make changes. They do what God instructs them to do. How they do it, we really don't know completely. Maybe it's that nudge. Maybe it's that encouragement. Maybe it's something happens and you just can't explain it, and that's just the way it is. And I'm sure that we all can think back in our own lives of those kind of times. The fact is that we do not worship the angels. We do not give glory to the angels, but from where it all comes. and that is from God. Because God is the one who is in charge of all things. So, Lord willing, next Wednesday evening, we will continue our study in angels. And I do want to talk about guardian angels. And I want us to understand what the Bible teaches. And yes, we'll go back to Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 14 in that study. So we'll begin there next Wednesday evening.